Hello everyone, Christina here. Happy Monday. Welcome to day 10 of the holiday card series for 2021. Today's card uses a few products that I designed for Simon that have recently come out onto the market, and I've been just waiting for the perfect time to use them. So we're going to do some ink blending with a stencil and some masking. Let's see what else is on this. There's some heat embossing. It's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get into it. Like I mentioned in the intro, I'm going to be using a couple products that I designed. The first one is the Holiday Messages Ornament Stamp Set. I did the lettering and drew the circle and the little top of the ornament. So I'm going to be using this stamp set as the main greeting and kind of imagery for the card. And then this snowflake stencil I love so much. Those are all snowflakes that I've designed. In fact, they've all been dies over at simonstamp.com. I also grabbed the Nesting Circles die set from Waffle because this circle happens to be the exact size as that big black solid circle. And there is a coordinating die set that goes with that stamp set, but the circle is just a little bit larger than the stamp circle. And I'm going to be actually masking off the area on the card and then blending ink into the center of the circle. So I wanted it to be the exact size of the stamp set so that I could stamp the greeting on top. It'll make a little more sense as we get into the blending and why I needed to mask it. So I used that circle die and I cut out a circle window out of some masking paper and then placed it onto some cardstock. This cardstock is cut to an A2 card size, so it is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 tall. After I had the mask on there, I grabbed some inks from Concord and Ninth. I'm going to be using the color Cranberry for the actual ornament circle. And I have a large blender brush from Honeybee, and I'm just bringing the color in over that circle. I'm going to keep blending for quite some time until I have a nice solid circle. The thing that's really nice about these blending brushes is they're very forgiving. They start out very pale and faint with all the color you're applying. So if you want something that's a little bit more saturated or more of a solid color, you have the opportunity to layer that in and try to get it as solid as possible. So if you are a heavy-handed blender with blending foam or something like that, try these blending brushes. A lot of companies have these blending brushes in their product lines these days. Any of them are wonderful to work with. So I removed the mask and I'm left with this perfect red circle. And I wanted to have this card be completely one layer. And that's why I decided to do the masking with the ink blending as opposed to stamping that circle and then cutting it out with the die. So I did hit that with my heat tool so it was a little bit more dry. Otherwise, this masking paper didn't want to stick on top of the stamped area just because there was a lot of ink there. So I dried it a little bit and then I put that mask circle right on top. For the stencil, I used a little bit of pixie spray on the back. That's just a very light adhesive. You spray it on, let it dry for about a minute, and then you can place it down onto your project. And it will generally hold your stencil in place so that you don't have any of the areas kind of sliding or moving around. It's a great addition to your crafting stash if you have very delicate stencils like this. So now I'm using the color Midnight from Concord and Ninth, and I'm also using another one of those blending brushes, and I'm just bringing in the blue color from the top of my card design. I want it to be a very saturated dark shade at the top edge and then have it fade down more toward the bottom. And I'm taking my time as I blend all of these inks coming down. I did eventually put a little bit of Post-it tape on my fingertips because my fingers were picking up the ink that was on top of the stencil. You'll notice the stencil sometimes kind of moves and slides a little bit. So I did hold it down as I moved around. I think it's just because I was trying to blend, pretty quickly because I wanted a lot of that color at the top. So here's the initial blend. I'm going to pull off that stencil. I'm going to keep the circle mask on for the most part. I'm going to actually put it back on here. And we're going to blend over this again with that blue color. I thought that the white from the underneath the stencil was a little bit stark, and I wanted it to be a little more muted in the background of my card design. So I just kind of went over all that white area with more of the blue ink. And then eventually I brought in some intense black ink from Simon Says Stamp. And that's because the blue wasn't getting as dark and dramatic as I had hoped it would from the start. So I've just brought in a little bit of that black right on that top edge, and that just darkened things up and made it a little bit more dramatic. That was more of the intensity that I was hoping for. So I just brought that in. Okay, so now all of the stenciling and blending is done. I'm going to hit this with my heat tool and try to get it as dry as possible because I'm going to do some heat embossing. And if there's any wet spots or any little bit of moisture left on the card design, it will attract the embossing powder, even if I have not stamped in that area. So I dried it. I'm going to put some anti-static powder tool on top, and then I'm going to test it with embossing powder. I have not stamped yet. This is just the testing portion. I want to make sure that the embossing powder, or rather that the card design is ready for embossing. So I'm going to sprinkle this gilded embossing powder from Brutus Monroe on top, tap it off quite a bit, try to get as much of that powder off as possible, and it was really clean. It worked out really well. So I'm just swiping it with a brush just to make sure, and then I'm going to go into the stamping. I've put my card design into a Misty stamp positioning tool, and I'm positioning the Merry and Bright greeting from that stamp set right in the center of my red circle. I'm going to be stamping this greeting with some Versamark ink. So I did use my anti-static powder tool over that red dot one more time and then inked up my stamp with the Versamark ink. I'm going to use this Stampin' Bug glider. It's the Christmas version. Robin was nice enough to send it over to me, and I just use that to press that stamp very evenly down onto my project. At the same time, before I do my embossing powder, I decided to stamp the little hook, the little topper on my ornament, and I used a Versamark ink for that as well. I'm going to have the greeting and also the top of the ornament. I'm going to have both of those embossed in gold. So I'm going to go back to that gold embossing powder. This is Gilded from Brutus Monroe once again, and I'll just sprinkle this right on top, tip it over, let that powder slide off, and then tap it with my finger a few times. Then grabbed my heat tool, and I used my heat tool to melt all the embossing powder until it was melted and smooth. So it's super, super pretty, and it stands out really well on top of that red. Okay, so I'm going to die cut this down a little bit because I decided I wanted a little bit of a thicker border around my card. I wanted it to sort of be matted and have quite a bit of the white card base showing. So I used the A2 layers from Waffle Flower and cut this out. I now have a perfect area for my card. So I'm going to put some foam tape on the back of that panel. I'm not shy when it comes to the foam tape because we don't want any saggy middles. You want to make sure you have enough support underneath those panels. I put it onto an A2 card base. This is just a card base made out of some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 110-pound cardstock. And then I started to try out doing different things for the string on my ornament. I first used some white gouache and a very, very small paintbrush. I think it's a quadruple zero. It's a very, very small paintbrush. And I painted on the loops for a bow as well as the tails. And you can as you notice where that embossing powder is, it's resisting any of this white paint on top. I had hoped that the gouache would be thick enough that it would, go on top of the embossing, but turned out that it didn't. But I had already started painting with it, so I decided, I'll go ahead and put the bow on here first, and then I'll go look for a bunch of different white kind of pens in my stash and see what will work. Now, what worked was a Posca paint pen. So this is a very thick paint pen. It works great on glass and hard surfaces, so it makes sense that it would do well on top of the embossing powder. and I just went over that area that I had painted on with the gouache. Now I did let it dry before I did this, but it turned out really well. It covered up all that area, and I had a nice bright white bow on the top of my ornament. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card. It was a lot of fun to put together, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to finish it up at the end with that little bow on top, but it turned out great, so I really love it. Today's holiday question is all about stockings. Do you put stockings up every Christmas? And if you do, what do you stuff the stockings with? I remember one thing that was always a staple when we were kids is we would have an orange in the very bottom of the stocking in the toe. And later it became those chocolate oranges, the ones that are all together and you have to like smack it to break the wedges apart. Love those. One of my favorite treats over the years. So let me know down in the comments if you do stockings, and if you do, what do you put inside them? I'm pretty sure we could all use some good ideas for stocking stuffers this year. So thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys on Wednesday. I'll be back on my live schedule, and so I will see you Wednesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time.